go, Eddie. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Conduit Club and to this On Frontline event on Pakistan. Welcome if you're here in the room, and welcome to those who are joining us online as well. I'm Chris Morris. I write and broadcast and meddle in various things like this. And for a long time, I was a foreign correspondent with the BBC. For 4 years, I was based in South Asia. I actually lived in Delhi, but this was 2007 to 10, so I spent an awful lot of time in Pakistan covering things like the siege of the Red Mosque, the assassination of Benazir, the coup against Musharraf. It was a busy time in Pakistan, but it's always a busy time in Pakistan, right? So we all know that. And it's really hard Pakistan is always in the international news. I mean, very sadly, and I know Sek's just come back from Greece. I mean, in the news this week, because it appears that the boat which sank off Greece last week had hundreds of Pakistani citizens on board. So I think we should sort of ponder on that while we hold this session. But this session is primarily about Pakistan's internal turmoil, much of it swirling at the moment around the opposition leader, former Prime Minister Imran Khan. The panel will talk about him and what's been going on in the last few months in some detail. So let me just introduce the panel. Closest to me is Christina Lamb, Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent for the Sunday Times, who's been covering Pakistan. I don't want to be rude about this, but has been covering Pakistan for a very long time. Is that, I mean,
yeah, just back, very young.
Just back from yes, since she was very young. Just back from Ukraine, where she's been doing some amazing reporting, but obviously has decades of experience covering Pakistan. Next to Christina is Secunder Kermani, Foreign Affairs Correspondent at Channel 4 News, and of course before that, the BBC's Islamabad correspondent. I thought he was going to move to China, but he obviously took the Luca of Channel 4 instead and left the BBC. And then the far end, Saima Mohsin, who is a presenter and correspondent with Sky News, and was one of the launch lead presenters of Dawn News, Pakistan's first English language national TV channel. So we've got years and years of experience and expertise on the panel. The session will be like most of these sessions are. I'll ask each of the panelists maybe to speak for a few minutes. We'll have a discussion up here, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions as well. Maybe I could start with you, Sek, because I think you've been in Pakistan most recently. You were there when Imran was arrested on corruption charges, and then there were, of course, the response, the protests from his supporters, including pretty extraordinary and unprecedented scenes of people attacking military compounds and the homes of senior military officers. What's your perspective on what's going on in Pakistan at the moment?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in fact, I was in South Sudan, in Juba, waiting to go to the border with Sudan and stay in a tent with the UN to report on refugees coming from Khartoum, when I saw these astonishing pictures of ordinary Pakistanis violently protesting, some peacefully, some angrily, some violently, including going into the general headquarters in Rawalpindi. I mean, these are scenes that are, absolutely, really, I think, unprecedented in Pakistani history. And as soon as I saw that, I realized I needed to get to Pakistan as quickly as possible to try and report on it and report on the aftermath. But for me, I suppose each of us was in Pakistan at different epochs, and that's why it would be so wonderful to hear from Christina and Saima as well. For me, I arrived in Pakistan in 2017 in the lead up to the 2018 elections that brought Imran Khan to power. And so for me, in my kind of personal sense, that's where the kind of history of Imran Khan begins. Of course, it goes much further back. But, I thought what might be useful to share is three predictions that were made, two by me, one by someone else, all of which turned out to be wrong. So there's perhaps a useful caveat to
in the best tradition of a foreign correspondent.
Indeed, politics. Exactly. So the first prediction was, after seeing Imran elected in 2018, I and I think many others thought that he may well be the first prime minister to serve a full 5-year term in office. In many ways, he was a fresh force in politics. He had energized a young population. He had made fantastic use of social media. He had also, as is very important in Pakistan, got fantastic links with the military establishment. And, he denies it, of course, but, I think most objective observers would say that he was helped come into power in 2018 by the military establishment. He may have won without their help, maybe. That's an argument that can be made, but for me, I think it's clear that he had their backing. And that turned out to be wrong. And I'm still, I think, trying to understand how things could, the relationship between him and the military that was so close, where they both, proclaimed we are on one page, deteriorated, just in the space of really, frankly, a number of months towards the end of 2021. So that's the kind of first wrong prediction. The second one is, as Imran Khan was being ousted in the vote of no confidence in the spring of 2022, I remember meeting a politician who's a close contact of mine, who's very close to the intelligence services. And I said to him, look, aren't you guys worried that having Imran, I used a kind of rather vulgar expression that perhaps I won't say, but having Imran on the outside rather than on the inside is more dangerous, because he is someone who has an ideologically motivated base. He is not someone who, at least in the realms of public perception, is corrupt. Obviously, there are allegations against him now, but still, he's not considered by your average Pakistani to be someone who is personally financially corrupt. He's not going to be easy to knock out in the way that we've seen the Pakistani military do countless times in the past by, helping bring someone into power and then pushing them out, framing charges against them and then locking them up. And he was very confident. He said, no, Imran was ours, and now we'll get rid of him and he's over, forget him. And that was clearly wrong, because we saw Imran Khan come out fighting with these huge protests. We saw him take the military's ultra-nationalist narrative, inject it with steroids, and really throw it back in the face of the generals. I mean, all the talk of this American cipher, that there was a big international conspiracy to boot him out, to me, that was a deeply cynical move and statement. I was never convinced of it, but it was also political genius, because it really resonated with people, and they garnered him a lot of sympathy. And so we saw this cleavage that at least I've certainly never seen between the military establishment and one of their former protégés, where, in fact, lots of people on social media, lots of people within mainstream media who were previously supporting both Imran Khan and the military decided to side with Imran Khan against the people who, the army's military media wing, for example. And that was huge. I mean, you saw ISPR, the military's media wing, it seemed to me afraid to tweet for a long time, because anytime they tweeted about anything, even if it was innocuous, about the soldiers who were martyred in Kashmir, they would be full of abuse underneath it, saying, you generals, you sold us out. I mean, this was wild. I mean, people like Waqas Gorea and kind of liberal activists had been picked up and badly tortured for saying stuff that was, not as strong as that. And this was, followers of a mainstream party openly saying stuff on Twitter. So, that politician was certainly wrong. That was the second wrong prediction. The third wrong prediction was again mine. And that's when we saw this big reaction on the streets to Imran Khan's arrest. And I messaged this same politician. I said, look, I was absolutely right. Do you remember our conversation in Qusar Market in Islamabad? And I said, this is game over for you guys, because you've underestimated Imran Khan. And he replied to me very casually and said, look, dear, in that wonderful kind of paternalistic way that some elder Pakistani politicians have. You're right, he is very popular. But in our region, brute force always prevails. And that, obviously very harsh assessment, but has proved to be right. I mean, we've seen this, absolute dismantling of Imran Khan's party in just a matter of weeks. I mean, who is left from the senior leadership? Either in jail, or perhaps a few still in hiding, or you're now, sitting very happily alongside Jahangir Tareen and Aleem Khan, people who were, former allies of Imran Khan, who are now forming a new political party, often derided as the kind of the King's Party, the military's new party. So that for me is the kind of assessment of where we are, basically, over the last.
Let me ask you for one more prediction before we hear from the others. I mean, you mentioned that you thought maybe Imran was actually going to serve a full term, which is a reminder that there are supposed to be elections. This Parliament comes to an end in October this year. We don't have a date. We don't know under what conditions an election might be held. Presumably, the other civilian parties are figuring out how they prevent Imran Khan taking part. What's your prediction about elections?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Pakistan, this was around a month ago, just in the kind of aftermath of the kind of IK arrest saga, Imran Khan arrest saga. I asked a friend who's in in one of the ruling parties, and he said, IMF deal, 50-50. Elections this year, 50-50. But I think now, seeing the way and speed at which Imran Khan's party has been dismantled, I mean, remember, this is coming from a person who had 2 out of 3 predictions wrong, it seems that all efforts are being made to hold elections, but, of course, with a, very hobbled, if at all existent PTI party led by Imran Khan. I mean, it seems clear that the military establishment are, absolutely determined not to allow him to come back this time. But, the other thing to say is, never say never in Pakistan. I mean, Nawaz Sharif and, the Sharif clan, they looked like they'd gone beyond the pale, and they were busy talking about the head of the intelligence services, General Fairs and General Bajwa, and, saying stuff that's not hugely dissimilar, although they were never quite as bold as what Imran Khan has been saying now when they were in opposition, and they've been brought back. One person in the Pakistani politics once told me that being in Pakistani politics is always being in a blind alley. Everyone needs someone. So the military, they might bring someone they like into power, but they can't afford to let them get too comfortable. So it means they always have to side with someone who's in opposition. So, never say never to a return of Imran Khan.
So, Saima, how popular is he still? Clearly not among the higher echelons of the... Yeah, it depends who you ask, doesn't it? But how popular is he? And maybe the other thing you could address is, because I know you were in Pakistan last year for the floods, the other thing which you mentioned with the IMF deal, the economy's in a mess. I mean, food price inflation at the moment is running at about 50%, and people are pretty desperate. So how does that play into what's happening?
That's a lot to answer.
No pressure.
But I mean, Imran Khan, we know, is hugely popular, and when I first met and interviewed him back in 2004 or 5, he was full of bravado and confidence, and such an iconic figure in Pakistan. The understanding was that he really could captivate the mind of a generation and perhaps turn things around for Pakistan. And he had lots of ideas, but they were only ideas at the time. They weren't real policies, and there was no shadow cabinet. And I remember kind of confronting him and saying, well, you and whose army? I mean, I should have been careful with the choice of words there in Pakistan, but, he turns out he did form an army and got the army on side. Just one point on historically the political situation. I've been Pakistan correspondent for various organisations, for PBS NewsHour, CNN, Channel 4 News and ITV. And obviously you see a different angle depending on who you're covering and what story you're covering over the years. And with Pakistan, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think that has been the failure of understanding for every leadership who thinks they have the power to change things, or they have enough of a popularity and captive audience. Most parties in Pakistan and most of the leaders, they're kind of restricted to a province. That's where Imran was very different, because his popularity among the younger generation was countrywide and worldwide. So, like I said, he could have captured the mind of a generation, and he has to a certain extent. If you will permit me, I think his failing was that he spent his years in office continuing as a campaigner, electioneering, talking about corruption and talking about the past, rather than talking about the future and doing something about the future. I've had this conversation with him many times as well, myself, to his face. So it won't be a revelation to him. But, what he turned to in the end, which was to try and turn everyone against the military and show them the realities, which was the reality that he denied when he first came into power, which is that no one leader can ever come to power in Pakistan without the tacit approval or help of the military. It's just not simply possible. They are far too great a force in Pakistan. So had he spent those years perhaps educating people about the realities, realpolitik, not just dynasties and great ideas and all of that, and how corrupt everyone else is but me, I think it would perhaps this revolt could have been better sustained, actually, and change would have been better. On top of that, Pakistan is in such a precarious position yet again. I can't tell you how many times, like you mentioned Dawn News, that I also worked in the domestic media in Pakistan, which gave me a really unique understanding of the country that you don't get as a foreign correspondent. And it, you know, time and time again, Pakistan finds itself on the brink, whether that's because of its, well, what I believe is it's because of its unique geographical placement. You know, it's between China, India, Iran, Afghanistan. It has a coastline as well. So it finds itself in a really extraordinary situation time again, and it does not do itself any favors, whether that's being unable to or encouraging smaller terrorist or extremist groups, thinking that you can keep them on hand and on side, from starting out in the 70s with obviously the backing of the US against Russia, where the Mujahideen became the Taliban, or fast forwards to now the small, you know, the other groups, the TTP, the TLP, etc., etc. And because of those internal political turmoils, whether that's between parties or internationally being considered a pariah state time and again, it hasn't managed to find its footing economically. It hasn't. No leader has spent enough time improving the infrastructure of the country. People will go and praise Shehbaz Sharif, the current Prime Minister, but long-time PM in waiting, younger brother to Nawaz Sharif, a Chief Minister, who has done great things for the roads and infrastructure of Punjab. But what about the rest of the country? You know, they still don't have clean drinking water. They still don't have consistent and sustainable running electricity. So there's a lot to do. And there's a huge amount of talent in Pakistan, which is consistently let down by its weak and faltering and arrogant political leadership.
And briefly, the state of the economy, does that help Imran? Does that bolster his campaign as the guy who's going to come back and fix things?
I mean, any politician can say that, right? Nawaz Sharif enjoyed a very good political time financially. So did President Musharraf, because he had plenty of money courtesy of the war on terror. So I think anyone can say that, whether it's true or not. There's also, if you look at the criticisms of Imran Khan, is there was a lot of spending and not enough bringing in of money. And just on that point, I spoke to one of my sources a couple of days ago, actually, and we were talking about the economy in Pakistan. And one of the big things is, for Pakistan, that, you know, obviously our imports, Pakistan's imports exceed their exports. And it would be good if they could trade with neighbours, like India, for example. But again, therein lies a problem where the military would never allow that, hence the ousting of Nawaz Sharif when he became very close to Vajpayee.
Christina, did you put your hand up to make a point, or were you just scratching your nose?
Glasses.
Yeah, just your glasses.
I'm happy to make
No, let's bring. I mean, Saima said, in a way, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I'm going to put on my best Jonathan Friedland voice and talk about the long view on Radio 4. I mean, we were talking beforehand in the late 80s, early 90s. I was based in Sri Lanka. That's the first time you were based in Pakistan. Things do seem to repeat. What's your perspective, looking back over all the years, on what we're looking at now?
Yeah, so I started my career as a foreign correspondent in Pakistan. I went there in 1988 when General Zia was in power. It was military dictatorship. And the West was very close to Pakistan at that time because the Russians were in Afghanistan and the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan. It was the last kind of war of the Cold War, and everybody who was pumping money into the Afghans to fight the Russians were doing it through Pakistan. And that's one of the reasons that Pakistan's military intelligence, ISI, became so powerful, because everybody, the Americans, the Saudis, the Chinese, the French, the British, were giving billions of dollars to the Afghans, but it was all directed through ISI. And so they had access to an awful lot of money, of equipment and training, and became very sophisticated, which I think has been a huge problem for Pakistan ever since, because they don't just get involved in foreign affairs, but as we have heard from my two colleagues here, in domestic affairs. And when I first heard the news about Imran Khan being arrested, I thought, here we go again, because basically in those 35 years since I first went to Pakistan, every prime minister pretty much that I have ever covered has, when they got into power, arrested their predecessor, and then when they've got kicked out of power, they've got arrested. And it's been this sort of merry-go-round. And I cannot think of another country that I cover where in 35 years it's still pretty much the same characters running the country. They swap parties, they create new parties, but it's still the same people. And that's very convenient for me because it means my contacts book from the late 80s is still kind of valid, but it's not a good thing for a country. And Saima talked about, the very talented young Pakistanis. They don't go into politics. Why would you? Because it's such a mess. So when Imran got arrested, I thought, okay, this is the same thing all over again. But actually, I don't think it is quite the same thing, because I think that this time round, and I should confess here that I'm not a great fan of Imran Khan. I've seen him from the days in the late 80s when he was a regular at Annabelle's, just up the road from here, something that he denies vehemently now. I think the man is a complete hypocrite. He's a liar. He wrote a memoir which is absolutely full of things that are not true. But he also is an inspiring figure. He won the World Cup as cricket captain. He built the most impressive cancer hospital in Pakistan, and he certainly, I was there the first elections that he ran in, when he didn't win, but to be Prime Minister. And he certainly inspired lots of young people to go and vote, and people from Pakistani diaspora to go back and campaign and vote. And it was very nice to see that. But I have to say, I spent 2 days with him on the campaign trail in those elections. And by the end of it, I really hoped he didn't win, because he said such ridiculous things about the things he was going to do. I thought it would be terrifying if he won. And he also, not for nothing, is he referred to as Taliban Khan. He tried to use, before getting in bed with the military, he tried to use the Islamic parties to help him come to power, because these were people that could get street power, and they might not win elections, but they're very good at bringing people out. So, this is somebody who, in my view, doesn't stand for much, because I've watched him over the years change his spots many times and then deny things that he had said before. However,
you mentioned, though, that the cast of characters hasn't changed.
Yeah, but he has. That was my however, because the one thing is, Pakistan had this very dynastic politics between these two parties, the Bhuttos and the Sharifs.
We're now in government together.
Yeah, and he did try to shake that up, and I think that was a good thing. And I also, accept that he does have popularity, and I think one of the ways that this is different to previous people who've been kind of spat out by the military is that he does, I believe, that he has support within the military, and he has support within the judiciary, both institutions which usually have kind of stood together and kind of against democracy generally. And this time round, they're clearly split, and that's why you've seen sort of different statements coming out from different people. So it's not so easy for them to just get rid of him totally. On the other hand, they have, as Secunder said, they've managed to dismantle much of his party. They've created this new party, and I believe that they will try and stop him running for elections at all, or if he runs, it will be in a very kind of crippled sort of way.
Yeah, just about the election, I've just been speaking to a few of my sources, I'll say, and apparently at the moment what's happening in terms of the election is they do want an election. When I say they, I mean the military, in October and on time. but they don't feel that they have the strength to go ahead without Imran participating. So at the moment, they're trying to get his public approval. They're going to have to convince him to do that. So at the moment, the back channel negotiations are going on, that he has to say, yeah, I'll participate in the election and I approve of it, and then it will go ahead. Because they know that without it, this entire generation of people who have come out and participated in politics, which is a huge change for Pakistan, and it's an important generation because the majority of Pakistanis...
Yeah, just to say, I mean, it's not
younger.
exactly a huge change, because when Benazir, back in the late 80s, I mean, let's not forget, she didn't come to power really with the approval of the military, although they made sure that she couldn't do certain things. So, I mean, she, before him, had real people power much more than, I would say, than he did. But unfortunately,
and
she
that's
didn't
the other
use
thing.
it.
When he says this has never happened before, I tweeted at the time, this has absolutely happened before, people. Benazir was jailed when she was 16 years old. Her father was hung, She was tortured, and she's a person who divides. Having met her and interviewed her and gone with a certain opinion of her from the UK to working in Pakistan, I learned so much about her and an incredibly brave woman in a patriarchal society where her father was hung and she then managed to come. So yeah, it has happened before, just never to Imran Khan.
Yeah, Secunder, you mentioned Taliban. You want to finish something?
Because I think this is different in two ways. One is because I think that he does have popularity in these institutions, but also Pakistan, as we sort of said at the beginning, is always in crisis. But I've never known a time when it's had so many crises at the same time. I mean, you've got the political crisis, you've got the economic crisis of defaulting, you've got terrorism back again now because of what's happened in Afghanistan. So it's facing, and it's, really, its relations with the rest of the world. It's trying to play this game with, it's now China is its great buddy. Unfortunately, Imran Khan was the first person to go to Russia the day after the war started. And let's remember, he arrived in Moscow and said to Putin, well, this is exciting, which I don't think many of us would share that view, particularly someone who's just come back from Ukraine. So it's facing so many crises at once.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about that third crisis, if you like, the kind of concerning imponderable about the re-emergence of the Pakistani Taliban. I mean, obviously they've never gone away, but in the time that I was there, they were very, very strong. They dipped away, but they are clearly coming back again. How does that play into the politics?
Sure, but before that, I just want to talk about briefly about Imran Khan's kind of enduring popularity, because I think it's important. And that's, at the time of his ouster, spring 2022, I was living in Islamabad at the time, working there for the BBC, and ordinary people, even who had voted for Imran Khan, were by that stage pretty disillusioned with him because the economy was deteriorating. A really common phrase that I would hear, excuse my bad Urdu, would be something, referring to the Sharifs or, the opposition. Theek hai, khate the, lekin lagate bhi the. It means basically, okay, yeah, they used to eat, they used to siphon stuff off, but they used to get work done. And that was the kind of dominant feeling from, a lot of ordinary Pakistanis. But, I remember hearing at a dinner party from someone in the PMLN, oh, look, Imran's on his way out. It's the economy, stupid. We're going to sweep the elections. But what happened after they took over? The economy's crashed. I mean, the Pakistani rupee is now, it's like 300, it's around 300 rupees, more than around that per dollar. But by the time, I think just before Imran was on his way out, it was around between 180, 200. I mean, that's an incredible amount, for a currency to depreciate in a currency, as we've heard, that is so dependent on imports. So, if it was the economy stupid back then, it's the economy stupid right now. And Imran Khan, one of, the things that he's done that's so politically impressive is keep that level of, turn that unpopularity that he had, in my opinion, at that stage now into, very high ratings. And that's why you've seen this kind of very brutal crackdown. I mean, I think it's important to kind of register that. I mean, there are thousands of members of Imran Khan's party, grassroots activists, as well as kind of, senior political leadership who are in jail, who have, been mistreated, who have been, whacked around by the police. There are people who are missing, who become victims of enforced disappearances. And, there is a narrative that, yes, at least some of maybe Imran Khan's supporters and his party used to downplay some of those issues when they were in power, and those tactics were being meted out to the opposition. But that doesn't excuse, the establishment, the intelligence services from doing that against Imran Khan's supporters now. I mean, you've got, journalists and commentators who have been. Imran Riaz Khan is a very popular pro-Imran Khan commentator. He's controversial figure. Lots of people don't like his style of journalism, but the guy's been missing for what, maybe a month, like 2 months now. He's not. The police said, oh yes, we arrested him, but he's not in our custody anymore. And there was a video of him being taken away in a pickup truck, but that video is disappeared. I mean, everyone knows he's with the intelligence services. Everyone knows. And there's a load of other journalists who've been picked up as well, who've been threatened, who've had FIRs, charges leveled against them. I mean, there's all the stuff that the current government used to complain about when they were in opposition, they are now absolutely complicit with the military in doing now. And, it's really disappointing to see just how eager. I mean, I was always, I have to say, very skeptical about when the opposition party, the now government, former opposition were booted out in 2018. They adopted a slogan of vote ko izzat do, respect the vote. And I was always skeptical about their democratic credentials, because they themselves were certainly the PMLN, the Sharifs, were former military protégés as well. And now we've seen that despite all their rhetoric and the critiques that they had of the military, the intelligence services, when they were in opposition, they jumped at the chance to get back into bed with them. And frankly, when we look at Imran Khan and the PTI, for all their strong language, I think they would do the same as well. I mean, you still have people of Imran Khan supporters who are big fans of General Fairs, the man who is the head of the intelligence services while Imran was in power for most of his duration, and he was the one, by all accounts, who was responsible for a very harsh crackdown on journalists, who was cajoling coalition partners while Imran was in power. And they're still big fans of it. So I think so much of the intellectual energy of Pakistan gets used up by the political class, obsessing not about courting votes from the general public, but about courting the opinion of the military. And that's why there's not enough attention given to the demands of ordinary people. That's why one of the reasons why the economy is in such a bad state. That's why 400 young Pakistanis, according to my figures, or 380 of them, died off the coast of Greece. Because no one in the country really, from the political class, really deeply cares about the ordinary people. They care about the military. And fault with that should be put with the politicians, but it ultimately lies at the feet of the military.
Okay, we're going to go to questions in a minute, but just back to the issue, and to all three of you really, of the re-emergence of the Taliban and how significant and how worrying that is. I mean,
yeah,
do you want to go first?
So I went to Pakistan. I mean, this is also a weird thing. So 2 weeks before the Taliban took power in Afghanistan, I got a call from Pakistan's information minister, so that was then Imran Khan's information minister, saying, we want to invite you to Pakistan for a week to meet Imran Khan and the army chief Bajwa and Fez, the ISI chief, for briefings about the regional situation and Afghanistan. And so we were having a small group of senior journalists from around the world. So we were invited to go there, I think it was for the 20th of August. So at the time, I wasn't really planning to do it, but I agreed, thinking, okay, And then, astonishingly, the Taliban take over in Kabul on the 15th of August. And it just felt like they knew this was going to happen. That's why they'd set up this trip for us, because the trip was all about them being very triumphant about how our boys have taken over in Kabul. So we had these briefings and they were absolutely exultant. We told the West, you'll never defeat the Taliban. We knew this would happen, and now you'll have to deal with us again. They thought that the Taliban would be recognized, that people would then have to deal with Pakistan just in the way I described at the beginning, in the 80s, when Pakistan was the sort of conduit for getting to Afghanistan. They thought the same thing was going to happen. It absolutely didn't happen. The call that Imran Khan thought he was going to get from Joe Biden never came. And the rest of the world was horrified at what happened. And Pakistan found itself very isolated internationally on this. But also they found that their proteges, the Taliban, basically turned around to them and said, actually, we don't need you. And Fez, the head of ISI, was in Kabul at the end of August when he waltzed into the Serena Hotel, knowing that that's where all the journalists were. We would all see him. So several of us immediately grabbed him and said, what are you here for? And he was, I've just sort of come to see what's happening. And he was clearly there to tell the Taliban, this is who should be in your government, this is what we think. He made it very clear that we're in charge here. But the Taliban didn't like that very much. And now Pakistan doesn't have the influence that it thought it would have after all those many years of investment of backing the Taliban. That's not to say it doesn't have any influence. I mean, there are some factions, like the Haqqani group in the Taliban, that are close to Pakistan's military still, but they're not the people that are most influential now. And basically what's happened, not only has Pakistan found it's not got the influence it thought it would have, but the TTP, the Pakistan Taliban, were released from jail by the Afghan Taliban and allowed to go back. And they're sort of in a reverse situation. They are now using Afghanistan as their sort of safe haven, just as the Afghan Taliban used Pakistan as safe haven when they were fighting NATO troops. So this has caused a huge problem for Pakistan, because it's now meant that its terrorism has come back, and they've particularly targeted police and security services. But it's, and this is what happens, or you mentioned, Saima, when you try and you think that you can use these forces and create, Pakistan's military establishment created these groups in the first place, and now they find they can't control them.
Yeah. Saima?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That it's, in the way I said, there's generational change, and it's small but significant perhaps sometimes, and the significance here is the lack of direct control, that there is no hotline, there is no phone they can pick up and speak directly to the Afghan Taliban and get what they want done. Similarly, they did, let's not forget, but the Pakistan military did do a phenomenal, brutal and bloody job of dismantling the TTP and various other extremist groups, in particular after that horrific attack on a school where 144 children died in, I think it was December 2016. And so that won public opinion over, because before, a military couldn't go and kill its own people in its own country. It would just have been horrific. They didn't have public opinion on board, but they utilised that to get public opinion on board, go in and crack down in the tribal areas, which are no longer called the federally administered tribal areas. And so a number of people have been eliminated, these very significant figures like Hakimullah Masood, et cetera. But like you say, the Haqqani network is still there, the TTP in essence is still there, and they are re-energized by the fact that the Afghan Taliban can do it, well, maybe so can we. As small and disintegrated as they are rebuilding, and they do feel re-energized by this. And I'd also like to note that the kind of Kashmiri freedom fighters have been pretty quiet of late, but I do wonder when, you know, they might raise their ugly head as well at some point.
I mean, just to add on the theme of militancy, I mean, I think I take a slightly different view from the other two here, in that, I mean, as Saima said, yes, you know, there was a campaign that was waged by the Pakistani military that was very brutal, that you know, had allegations of human rights abuses, but was also very effective in stamping out the Pakistani Taliban insurgency, which, you know, at a huge cost to the Pakistani military and a huge cost to the Pakistani civilians. I mean, 70,000 civilians were killed. There was a time, I mean, when I moved into Pakistan in 2017, it was the tail end of that. You guys probably saw much more. You know, I would see it from afar here, but there was a time when you would have, you know, almost, it felt like daily or weekly, you know, major bombings in major cities. It was terrible. And you know, the military, to its credit, for all the allegations of human rights abuses, did a very strong job in cracking down on that. And now the uptick that we've seen, I would refer to it as that. I mean, there is an uptick. We have seen some bigger incidents. For example, the horrible attack in Peshawar, where on a police academy, but it's not at that same scale. And to me, the kind of the political atmosphere in Pakistan has changed a lot since then as well, partly in light of, you know, things like you say, the attack on the APS school. Before that, there was this kind of ambivalency within the ordinary Pakistani, I think, that was torn about, well, who are these guys? You know, they say they're fighting for Islam. You know, maybe we want Sharia, even if we like to have a whiskey pani, you know, in the evening. This kind of, it spoke to this existential crisis within, particularly the Pakistani male, about who they are and who they wanted to be. And then, you know, after attacks like that, then I think public opinion shifted. And now, you know, I really, especially with the kind of energizing force that someone like Imran Khan brought to Pakistani politics, I don't see, you know, who knows what can happen, especially at a time of kind of economic distress, but I don't see the country's intellectual energy drifting towards jihadism. In the Muslim world as well, following the kind of collapse of ISIS, there's been, I think, a move away from that as like a dominant expression. Yes, the TTP has got kind of safe havens in Afghanistan. It also had them under the previous government. The Afghan intelligence services had, you know, a kind of pretty close relationship, or an ambivalent relationship with them, you know, as a reciprocal way of targeting Pakistan in response to the Pakistani intelligence services harboring, you know, the Afghan Taliban leadership. So to me, I think looking at terrorism and militancy, you know, it's always important to kind of keep an eye on it, but that's not where we're at with Pakistan right now. It's, you know, the dominant themes are political instability, economic instability.
Okay.
And also, don't forget, they don't have the two significant driving factors that the Mujahideen and the Taliban had, which is the invasion of Russia back in the 70s and the war on terror by the US, which the Taliban and the TTP.
The world's looking the other way in some ways now, isn't it?
Definitely.
Questions from the floor. We'll take 2 or 3 at a time, and please do make them questions rather than statements. Have we got a microphone at the back? I'll do the ones at the front. So there's 2 here, and then the gentleman here, and we will come to you in another round.
Thank you. Actually, I've just concluded the Pakistan Literature Festival, which was held on the 17th in London. And one of the things that came out was that, I mean, like Saima said, that what happened at the Army Public School in 2014, which gave, in a similar way, what happened in Karachi on the 9th of May, and the monuments of martyrs and were destroyed, army martyrs. It suddenly gave, I mean, it was said that the Imran Khan actually handed over an opportunity to the army on a silver platter, because they became very popular and they leveraged that these are politicians who are attacking our martyrs. And you know, in Karachi, I saw pictures, banners on every street and across the country of the army chief, the ISI head, the Joint Chief of Staff. I've never seen these banners of all these people acting as heroes. My question is that, do you think that by not talking to the government, has Imran Khan missed a great opportunity if they had all got together to cut the army down to size?
Thank you. That's really interesting. I don't know if you saw, there's a piece by Hussein Haqqani recently in Foreign Affairs that made a similar sort of point, saying the main thing Imran has done is actually strengthen the army's grip on the country rather than the opposite. So that's one question. Another one here, and then...
A question about your views on India. So with democracy in retreat there, and with Modi amplifying the Hindu sort of chauvinism to the detriment of the 170 million Muslims that live there, is that heading in the wrong direction in terms of a flashpoint with Pakistan, and might that then play out in the whole Taliban story?
Yes, you've all referred to the military. Is the military one solid unit, or are there factions within the military? And either way, what does the military want?
Okay, so how long have we got? A few days, or
Yeah, exactly.
who wants to go first? Simon, go.
Could they have got together? Good question. Probably yes. Would they? No, because I don't know how many of you have watched Succession, but it's almost like, it's the final season. And I remember after Benazir was assassinated, which was a devastating, definitive moment in Pakistan's political history, and it has had plenty. There was a lot of talk then, coalition governments, and even Musharraf had touted it at some point that we'll do one where we'll all be one, and it wasn't called a coalition, I can't remember what it was called, but anyway, he came up with a great title for it. The trouble is there'll always be someone who wants the power to themselves, and in the end, no one wins, which is, if you haven't seen the last season of Succession, I apologise. So, yeah, you're right. Sometimes these things can backfire, and the military can... the military has benefited with those it would benefit from, and they have not with those that would. Do you know what I mean? The point is, it's a period of education is needed in Pakistan about what really goes on in Pakistan. And people need to be open to accepting and acknowledging the truth about what goes on in Pakistan. India, my opinion is right now there's too much going on in Pakistan for them to worry about what's going on in India with India's Muslims. Yes, various statements are made by the Foreign Office. I've seen it over time. I've also discussed it with, the Foreign Office there and said, are you planning on condemning it? What are you going to do? There's too much going on in Pakistan, in my opinion. And actually, I think, more importantly, it's not Pakistan that needs to criticise that. It's the rest of the world, and perhaps, the Islamic organisation and the Middle East countries. And what do the military want? What everyone wants, power and money.
They have it.
But is anyone ever satisfied?
Christina.
Okay, so first of all, whether Imran could have done this differently, I actually think that, so being a bit sceptical about him, I don't think he's really taking on the military in terms of trying to stop them having power in politics in Pakistan. I think he just wants the military to support him still. So he wants to get rid of the current army chief who he believes is against him and wants somebody different. That's, I'm afraid. India, I think it's incredibly depressing what's happening there. I used to, when I lived in Pakistan, or for years, I would go to India and see India as a sort of good example that here was a democracy with a very flourishing media, and now, it's the opposite. What's happened to the media in India is very depressing, and the whole Modi nationalism is very worrying. But I think, again, that plays into the hands of the Pakistan military because, the reason Pakistan has this huge military and powerful military is because of India, because I've never known a country that Pakistan defines itself in negatives. It defines itself as not being India. Everything is about being against India. And so the more that India, is doing bad things, then the better for the military. The military has power, it has money. Is the military monolithic? I think it used to be. I think there is this sort of certain split now, because I do think that people in the lower ranks of the military have some support for Imran. But the military, Aisha Siddiqui, any of you know her, wrote a book called Military Inc. because military in Pakistan is not just a military as we know it. It is a huge economic power. It has factories. It produces cereals, cement. It owns all the most expensive property. Every city in Pakistan has this Defence Housing Authority, which is land plots given to the military. So once you have joined the military, you basically know that you're set for life because you will have an inroad into this enormous economic machine. And when you retire from the military, all the retired generals end up running different organizations. And that's also one of the problems, that sort of things like the National Accountability Bureau that arrests all these politicians for corruption or so-called corruption, is run by a general. And so, so they're completely, that's why within the military, there haven't really been splits over this in the past because they know which side their bread is buttered, basically.
And Secunder, I mean, in a way, sort of linking to the questions, I mean, what does the military want and what about India? And one thing that strikes me is there's still clearly security, military rivalry with India, but economically, India is now streets ahead. It's almost out of sight, and that must be concerning for the military who are trying to hold the reins of economic power.
Sure. I mean, actually, I think in terms of the relationship with India, we saw a big shift around kind of with the arrival of, at the time when Imran Khan came to power. And I think, you look at Imran Khan's initial statements when he became Prime Minister, he said, something along the lines of, India takes one step towards us, we'll take 2 steps towards it. I think there was genuinely a shift within both the Pakistani political circles and the military circles that realized that actually this era of wanting a overtly hostile relationship with India, it's bad for us. And so we saw this and Indians recognized it as well to an extent because they saw the level of what they would say as cross-LOC, cross-line of control, infiltrations by militants, as they would call them, as others would call them freedom fighters, decreasing, for example. And so I think there was a big shift within the thinking in Pakistan, but that unfortunately, you could say, coincided with a real hardening of positions within India. And then when you saw the abrogation of Indian administered Kashmir's more autonomous status, that made it really politically unviable for anyone, I think, in Pakistan to try and advocate for better relationship with India. In fact, actually, one of the things that many observers say was a reason for the discord between the military leadership and Imran Khan was that the military, ironically, wanted to have a better trading relationship with India. Imran Khan, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, the then foreign minister, were concerned that that would not be politically tenable. But actually, even speaking to Indian officials in Islamabad around the time of the election, many thought, look, this is the best chance for progress in relations between the two countries because we've got a right-wing government in India and we've got a military-supported government in the form of Imran Khan. So, it's easier for nationalists and right-wing parties and groups to make peace because they haven't got the hawks in the background accusing them of being traitors. But, I think it was like ships in the night. And just as Pakistan was opening up to the idea of it, India wasn't. And, speak to Indians, they'll say, well, that's because of, a long history of attacks, Mumbai, and the deep suspicion there, and they were fed up with it. But either way, I think that's an important shift in dynamics that took place that isn't always fully appreciated. In terms of what the military want, look, yeah, it's a continuation, as Christina and Saima have said, of their kind of hold on the country. I mean, to be fair to the military to an extent as well. I mean, civilian politicians largely over the history of Pakistan have not done well, even in the, everyone says, okay, foreign affairs and defense and this type of stuff is the ultimate responsibility for that lies with the military. But we haven't seen really service delivery improved by civilian political leaders in to the extent that the Pakistani population wanted to see. And one of the things that I've seen now traveling more widely across the world is how far behind Pakistan is compared to other countries in Asia, and it's really depressing to see. I thought, okay, a lot of these post-colonial countries would be kind of at the same level. I went more extensively to Latin America, to Southeast Asia, and I thought, oh my God, it really hurts to see. But on a slightly more positive note, I think one of the things that has changed, and it coincided, with the last 10 years, let's say, and particularly with Imran Khan, is a greater focus on political accountability, the on-service delivery, and you've seen that both in the narratives of certainly Imran Khan's party, but also the other parties as well, the PMLN, Nawaz Sharif's party, and the PPP as well, I assume, about trying to make sure that they are delivering more for ordinary people. Whether they do that or not is up for question, but I think there's more of a focus on that, and that's also coincided with the rise of social media in Pakistan, because that means that there is a greater level of kind of accessibility for the ordinary person to make their voice heard and their discontent.
You want to make a point, and then Christina, and then we'll go to your
as
question.
Christina very wisely reminded us, that the military has this amazing infrastructure and ability to create a system and an infrastructure that works. Therefore, you join the military, you may rise in the ranks, you may not, but you will retire with a plot of land, and there's a system, and there are other organisations that they run, whether it's the cement or 4G means soldier, 4G cereal, or whatever there is there, that's for you. The heartbreaking stuff is that there is not a mirror-like infrastructure outside the military in Pakistan, and I'm sure it breaks all our hearts, and because you see this youth that I keep referring to, it's more than, when I was living there at 64%, I don't know how much more now, was under the age of 18 at the time, and the big focus was, okay, we don't have an infrastructure to work at, and we don't have the factories and the manufacturing or whatever in country, but the digital age changes that. And these people were going online. I did a story for CNN where there were a lot of young people creating all sorts of startups, working with Forbes 100 countries around the world. And then what's happened recently? They switch off the internet, and these young people are losing their income again. So, there's just, as Secunder said, they need to think about the next generation and stop thinking about themselves.
I was in Pakistan in January and working with some Pakistani journalists who were trying to focus on education. And the main thing was, they said, the trouble is to get anything into the paper, to get anything onto the channel, politics just brushes it all aside. We want to talk about this stuff, but it's almost impossible. Christina, and then we'll go to...
Yeah, and we should remember, Pakistan's a huge country. It's, 300 million people? It's going to be...
230?
230. Isn't it going to be the 5th biggest country on most populous? But no, what I was just going to say, in slight defence of the civilian politicians, is that I think it's been very difficult, because no Prime Minister has ever actually been able to carry out their full office. They're always removed, that nobody gets into power thinking they're going to be there for very long. So it makes it very difficult for people to have a long-term vision. And I remember when Benazir took over in the late 80s, and there was so much hope because Pakistan had been under military dictatorship for 11 and a half years. People were so happy, even the bureaucracy, even people within the military were saying to me, this is really going to be a big change. And then it felt like she threw it all away. Within 2 years, it was gone, and largely because of the military took power again, but it was largely because of all the corruption. And I talked to her and other people in the party, why did you do all of this? Of course, she didn't admit to start with that she did, but other people said to me, but we never thought we were going to be there for very long. So we thought we need to make a kind of treasure chest we needed money to be able to continue in the future. So if you're taking office thinking, we're going to be kicked out very shortly, you're not going to be thinking very much about building roads and
long-term planning.
Still, if you're building houses in Dubai and people are eating literally for lunch bread and onion, roti pyaz, that's a glass of tea, that is, Imran Khan, I think, weaponized corruption, and a lot of we've seen the military repeatedly weaponize corruption, but what's important to remember is two things are simultaneously true. that lots of civilian leaders have been politically corrupt. That is, in a country where people are starving, absolutely unacceptable, and you know, is atrocious. But at the same time, the real reason that most of these corruption cases are brought at the times they're brought and prosecuted is politically motivated. And you know, that was so those two things are simultaneously true.
There's more questions. There's the woman at the back there. Any other?
We've got the microphone here first.
And there's two here. Woman at the back first.
Right.
Is that the microphone?
Hi. So I feel very sadly and deeply diaspora asking this question. Sorry, I'm here. But I wanted to ask about public sentiment in real time. You spoke about the boldness on Twitter and on the streets, and suddenly things have gone very quiet. Is that about sort of the brutal crackdown on dissent? Or is that actually about the sort of really tasteless propaganda working? Is public sentiment actually kind of switching in favor of the military? Or is it just that people are despairing?
Okay, thank you. I've got two questions at the front here.
Christina, you just said that that Imran is not the person to take over. Then who is there? Shall we give it back to Nawaz Sharif and Zardari? There is nobody there. So if Imran is not right, what is the future for Pakistan? And as far as the military is concerned, we have built up the military over the years with the amount that we have invested in the military. That's the monster, and that will rule Pakistan.
Can you give the microphone to the gentleman at the back? We'll just take one here, and we're going to take four. One here, and then you, sir.
Thank you. If any of you had a crystal ball looking into the future, which is a magical ball, of course, looking at Pakistan, it's not breaking news anymore. It's what's happening. There's kind of sublines, what's happening in Ukraine and other places. People are getting killed. No one looks at Pakistan as a dynamic economic power. And without the economy flourishing, where does it go for the future, irrespective of the military fighting and politics? So if you had a crystal ball, how do you think Pakistan can start building the most important infrastructure for the economy to benefit its citizens?
Okay, and then right at the back.
Thank you very much for the interesting talk. And with a great apology, I'm going to make a comment and ask a question. So,
a brief comment, please, because we're
so
short-ish
all
on
media,
time.
all outlets are biased, and I say this with authority because I'm a lecturer at the Brunel University, and one of the things we study is how same events being reported by the different media outlets. So look at the good peoples here who got nothing to do with Pakistan, and they are here to do something good. But all the journalists are very much biased, and they only tell you half the story. Like it's been said that the army been always the culprit, and they choose the politician. But then who chooses the army chief? It's the Western government who chooses the army chiefs. And then why do you want to be a leader of the country? Because you wanna make some money, you wanna make a huge, and where does all that money goes? All to the British tax havens and to the UK government. So all I want to say is why the journalists are not very much unbiased, and why don't they do some goodness and tell the full story to the people where the source of the corruption is? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got four questions there. We've got the gentleman at the back. I will come to you. So we've got the influence of social media. Is opinion changing? If not Imran, then who? Crystal ball and biased journalism in Pakistan. There's a lot to take on there.
Look, sorry.
I want to address biased journalism. I appreciate lots of outlets now, and you'll see that in the UK too. You know, depending on which newspaper you pick up, you'll get a very different opinion. But then the onus is on a knowledgeable readership to go and find the alternative opinions too. I mean, that's not our job necessarily all the time. That's not the kind of journalist I hope I'm not. And I also would like to say that a lot of vested interests tend to try and say that certain journalists have a slant and show them, when I was there, I was labelled raw, Mossad, I had death threats, I had people turning up with guns, I had to have a 24-hour bodyguard who we jokingly called my shadow because somebody decided to leak that I was allegedly, a spy. So let's just bear that all in mind. I also think that the public need to educate themselves on the difference between columnists and journalists. And Pakistan has a lot of columnists on TV, and they have a lot of opinions on TV rather than journalism, just to say. But all due respect to the journalists in Pakistan, many of them who've laid down their lives covering that country for decades, and thank you,
Okay.
trying to do a good job.
Yeah, and the difference between opinion and news is well made. Do you want to address one or two of the other questions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I also just want to touch on the idea that the kind of the Brits or the Americans are kind of manipulating things that happen in America. Let me tell you, as far as the Western world is concerned right now, Pakistan is so low down their agenda. It's actually a fight as people who care about Pakistan to try and make space often on the airwaves for it. It is really not a foreign policy priority, particularly after the Western withdrawal from Afghanistan. There is.
I was going to say the contrast with 15 years ago when it was AFPAC was the top of every foreign editor's agenda.
Indeed. Look, public opinion. I think that's a really interesting question. If the opinion of the man on the street is gonna change. Look, it's hard to say. I mean, Imran Khan still seems to be personally incredibly very popular. It would be fascinating to see if he is able to take part in elections himself, even just without his party apparatus, to see what that translates into, because there's a big split within Pakistan between voters who are ideologically motivated and those who vote along patronage-based lines. That is, has been the traditional way of doing politics. And in 2018, Imran Khan was quite open in saying that he was going to, as well as his ideological base, he was also going to reach out to the electables, the people who had their own constituencies basically and who get voted irrespective of which party they join. It would be interesting to see. I do think that there has been the events of 9th May, where you saw people attacking, places linked to the army. I think that has turned off, a significant number of ordinary Pakistanis. But I also think that there is still a lot of sympathy for Imran Khan and the kind of tactics that are being used against him, the cases that are being filed against him, and the cases that are being filed against his leadership and his party, ministers being forced to give press conferences, recanting that type of stuff. I don't think that works anymore. Pakistan is not a country that just has one TV channel, PTV, anymore. It's not even a country where you can just dominate the discourse through traditional media. I was talking to people in Old Lahore, when I was there a couple of weeks ago, and they were like shopkeepers making jokes about Papa John's pizza, because there was a big kind of allegation and scandal that a military general had made lots of money and plowed it into Papa John's pizza in America. The level of political awareness in Pakistan is huge. I mean, you can go out to the street in England and people would struggle to name you as the cabinet ministers. In Pakistan, you go to a barber shop, it's not NTV playing or like the football playing, it's politics, because politics is like so fast paced, but that's bad in many ways, but it is also inspiring because that level of political engagement is really, really high. And so, come to the future, I think that's the only thing that gives me a bit of hope, is that the level of awareness and the desire for greater accountability, the desire for improvement in services is there from the grassroots, and it is translating. Pakistan is, on the kind of big, wide perspective, if you look at it historically, it is moving forward. Like, for example, the number of children under 5, dying or being stunted, that is improving, but it's not improving fast enough. It's not improving as well as its neighbors. It's not improving as well as its region. But at the same time, I think Pakistan's this country that always seems to be on the verge of complete crisis, complete kind of capitulation, and somehow at the brink just pulls itself back.
And on the verge of greatness often as well.
On the verge of both.
Sadly.
So,
I'm sad
Christina.
to say that political awareness has always been there. That's what attracted me to go and live in the country in the first place. Everybody talked about politics all the time, and it's partly because it just felt sort of existential. I mean, and who, if not Imran, who? You know, Imran is 70, right? We're talking about him as though he's in his 70s, as though he's some young, inspirational firebrand. He's been around forever. I think that, like I said earlier, the sad thing is Pakistan needs a whole new generation of politicians. It needs young people to go in. It needs to get rid of all these people from the past, but where are they? They're not going into politics, and it's a sort of vicious circle, because presumably they're not going into politics because it's so discredited, but if they don't, then things won't change.
Right, we're coming to the last few minutes. We started a little bit late, so we can go on a little bit more. I've got the gentleman right at the back, and then the woman here. We're going to have to be the last two questions. Sir, you've been patient.
Thank you so much to Conduit for arranging such an amazing panel. I feel I'm in 1947, Pakistan being discussed by England, by people who are not from Pakistan. It's very strange. I just flew in from Pakistan for an event here. Another friend of mine was also here. He was also from the PTI. He left because people are being blamed for being associated to PTI. We're in the Conduit today. It has 2,500 plus members. All are impact investors, and they make the change happen, the systematic change which needs to happen. My name is Rehan. I run a political party in Pakistan, and we're creating the 4,000 new politicians in the country. That's basically what we do. We're not planning to run an election. Pakistan is a big problem for the planet, especially for Europe, because last week 500 people died in Greece trying to migrate to Europe. It's an economic crisis. If economic crisis happens in Pakistan, we will see a huge spillover. It's not Syria, it's not Ukraine, it's 230 million people. If a few million people try to migrate here, it's going to be a huge humanitarian crisis for the planet, not just for the country. What can we do? What's the magic ball? And I would love that answer to be discussed, and I hope that the next time we have a topic here is not politics, because that's what is actually keeping us static. It should be opportunity, Pakistan, the 230 million people who are there, which the GDP of the country is half the size of Walmart right now. It's only 250 billion, whereas Walmart is 500 billion. So the country which has changed in the last 3 years is it went from 20 million smartphones to 150 million smartphones, just in the last 3 years because of COVID. And that is the great opportunity for empowering the country. That's the magic ball, which we can use from sitting over here and empowering the people back in those countries who are less developed. But that's what my question is: how do we take it forward? If this esteemed organization can't take it forward, then I think entrepreneurs change the world. Politicians didn't really build the railways and the Walmarts of the world. Entrepreneurs really bring the change. So systematic change is what we need in a country. I moved back from the US 20 years ago with my family, so I can live there and feel the pain of people and actually work for them. And now I'm the only person who is more followed in Pakistan is Imran Khan.
Okay, so I take your point, sir. We're talking about Pakistan, not because it's 1947, because we all care about it, but
I'm very thankful, as I said, I'm very thankful.
But your question is essentially, how do we move forward? What comes next?
Right.
Ma'am. Sorry.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm representing as a youth of. I have spent 35 years over here, and I'm Nusrat. So it's really grateful for me to represent you over here. I'm not from any political party. I'm a journal, little poor girl from Pakistan. In the last year, I sell my house, I sell my land to come over here. And the UK is the land of opportunity for me. I have postgraduate over there, but we don't have the stable economic situation over there. We can't have the freedom to work over there because there are massive, huge parties. They have monopoly over there. They are not working equally. So when the Imran came, we have a hope that he's the person who can represent. Because if she is my fellow, she is my fellow, she can't represent me. So why did I choose them? No way. So we all choose Imran Khan because he was the hope. He was the leader who can represent in this era. Because we can't believe Nawaz Sharif, we can't believe Benazir, and I never would. So my question is this. I knew there is still same situation, and one of my colleagues said as well, this is the half of the picture. If you guys know, there are more than 90%, they don't have the bread and loaf to eat. They don't have the money to learn their education, to get the facilities. We all here. And even though 10 of my friends, today I asked them to come over there, and they said, just leave it, do your shifts. So money is the main source. My question is to all of you. If you are Pakistani, if you are concerning about Pakistan, so please bring some changes, bring some innovations like that, and help over such like of people who can bring up my country. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for both those questions, which in their different way, I think, are saying what's the positive vision for the future. So let's try and end with comments from all three of you on where we go.
I think it's what I was trying to allude to. Thank you so much for being so open and raw and sharing with people here what it's really like. And that is in all my answers. I know we've been talking, the theme was Pakistan's politics, but I kept alluding to the majority of Pakistanis, 230 million people, they are, they're under the age of 25, they're under the age of 30, they need jobs, they need an income, and if they had it, they wouldn't need to get on these boats, and they wouldn't need to come here or ask for visas or go to other countries, not just the UK. So I did allude to the fact that, the gentleman at the back said that the majority of them now have mobile phones, but those will only work if they have the internet. And so, again, it all goes back to the politicians being sensible and the military being sensible and not cutting off the internet and not cutting off their income. And I really do believe the digital era is the era for countries like Pakistan to make change. But at the same time, having covered the floods last year, and driving for 5 hours through Sindh and seeing water either side of the highway until actually the highway stopped and there was no more highway because the water had got so high. It's in a very worrying situation too because of climate change. So, but yeah, I hope it's the digital age, and I hope that more young people will turn online and get their income through startups and things like that, because right now it's going to take a while to build that alternative infrastructures, isn't it?
Secunder.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you touched on an important point about why people turn to Imran Khan and because he was a fresh force, and that's why when I was reporting there, I reported many stories that were very critical of his government. Many in his government were not happy with me, but I think that is the big thing that he did do, which was disrupt the two-party system and inject a fresh force, and that forced everyone all round to up their game. So that was a good thing. And now, if despite the very kind of weakened position he is in right now, the person who I think has the best chance of taking on the military is still Imran Khan, because he still has an ideologically motivated political base, because he is personally seems, despite the cases, does not seem that he is corrupt, or let's say he's certainly in public perception he is not corrupt. There may be questions to answer in some of the cases, but the public perception of him is not of someone who is corrupt. So he could be the politician who pushes back, but it seems like, certainly in the short term, the events of 9th of May were an overstep. That's why so many in this party are claiming that the violence was instigated by by people within the intelligence services themselves, because they realise it's I mean, whether you believe that or not, it's backfired, it seems. Look, in terms of the future, I'd like to say something optimistic, but, you know, I think we're journalists and it's hard. You know, I frankly see the country limping forward. And, you know, like I say, the big picture is that, yes, there are, you know, more women working than, for example, than there were 20 years ago, right? But not as many as if you go to other countries, exactly, to even other Muslim countries. You know, life expectancy is improving, but not as much as it is in other countries. And that's why you have this huge level of dissatisfaction, that is because the expectations of people are not being met. They're not, even when things are moving forward, they're not moving forward at the pace at which they should be moving forward. So I see, unfortunately, it limping forward, and I see less and less interest from the outside world. So I think it's great that so many people here are still engaged. I think it's great that so many people in the diaspora are still engaged. And, you know, whatever you think about the political situation in the country, I would encourage anyone on a personal level to try and, you know, do what they can on an individual level, at least, to connect with the country and try and improve it, because that's where I see a greater chance of kind of change being made on a small, immediate basis, rather than any kind of big macro changes helping move things forward.
Brief point, and then because I know we need to be out of the room soon. So brief point, and then Christina.
A brief point is, and it's in the doing, not the saying. It's not the rhetoric, which is what I said right at the beginning. That in a way, Imran lost an opportunity because he spent too many years talking about the corruption rather than doing more for people like you. And you know, and that's the thing. It's in the doing, not just the rhetoric. Everyone needs to demand in every country of their politicians to do, not just speak.
Look, we're all here because we really care about the country. And I mean, to me, I've had the best times of my life in Pakistan. I've also had some of the worst times of my life, largely due to ISI doing various things. But, you know, I passionately want things to change. But as long as so much of the budget goes to military, so little goes to education, I just, you know, despair about what's going to happen. And I would love for you to be able to stand in front of all those politicians and generals and say what you said with tears in your eyes, and just see how they answer you. How can they betray people like you day after day? It's just so sad, I think.
Actually, we don't have the freedom of speech over there. Our family said, especially the girls, don't discuss such high things in front of the home as we are over there. So there are other political pressure as well. We are not allowed. But here I am safe. That nobody can do such like this. Nobody can kidnap me. But if I talk like this in my country, so some of them might be possible. So I have the rest of the family member as well, while put myself in the hurdles.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment in Pakistan, you have a lot of people in Pakistani politics look up to places like China, and that both because of this improved service delivery and because they quite like the authoritarianism. But in Pakistan, what you're seeing and what you have seen is you've got the authoritarianism, but not the service delivery. Actually, for the vast majority of Pakistanis living even in an authority, I think so many people live a hand-to-mouth existence that they would, at least in the short term, sacrifice political freedoms for proper access to water, electricity, education. In the long term, I'm sure they would want democratic freedoms, and that's absolutely their right. But in the short term, that's what they would want. The big tragedy is they're getting neither. They're getting neither the genuine political freedom, neither you know, proper kind of, and at the same time they're not getting service delivery. It's the worst of both worlds, and that's what's depressing about things.
Look, last point, please.
If I add up, to be very honestly, the area where I am belong from, he's my neighborhood living. So the other political party giving the food stuff for the month, for the 2 months, so don't give the vote to them. So what will be the opinion and option?
Votes can be bought.
Yeah, that's the reason.
Thank you very much for for sharing that. And look, this conversation could continue for a long time. It can continue, but unfortunately up on stage we've run out of time. We'll be booted out by the Conduit Club if we're not careful. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you to Saima, Secunder and Christina for talking to us today.